I'm still getting people leaving comments on my videos who are in absolute denial about the fact that Errol Spence, PBC, whoever you want to blame, avoided the Terence Crawford fight for several years. Now, they first of all say that the fact that Errol Spence took the fight shows that he was never avoiding it to begin with. I mean, that has got to be one of the dumbest things I've ever heard in my life. There is such a thing as avoiding a fight for a certain period of time and then taking it somewhere down the line when you think that the guy has maybe slipped a bit, he's getting old, he's not as good as he used to be, etc. Which is exactly what Canelo Alvarez did with Gennady Golovkin. I mean, Canelo was ducking Golovkin so bad at one point that the sanctioning bodies actually invented a new weight class for Canelo. You guys remember that? When he was defending world titles at 155 or whatever it was? Totally ridiculous. And he was doing that so he wouldn't have to step up to 160 and fight Golovkin. But eventually, when he saw some slippage in Golovkin, then Golovkin fought Kell Brook and then particularly the Danny Jacobs fight, that's when Canelo and Oscar De La Hoya said, now's the time to get him, now's the time to actually take that fight. Same thing with Errol Spence. Terence Crawford beat Jeff Horn for the WBO welterweight title back in 2018, 5 years ago. That's how long he's been at 147. Now, if two fighters want to fight, it's going to happen. As long as there's no legal issues in the way, maybe one of them's tied down to a rematch or a mandatory or something like that. Those situations notwithstanding, if two fighters really want to fight each other, the fight will happen. Fights don't happen when one person doesn't want it. And I'm talking about at the top level, right? World Championship level. A fight doesn't happen when one of the parties, either the fighter themselves or their team, doesn't want it. And so why did it take 5 years for this fight to get made? If Errol Spence wanted it the whole time, are you trying to tell me that Crawford didn't want it? Are you having a laugh? Crawford had everything to gain by taking the fight. He wasn't as big a name as Errol Spence. He was calling for the fight for years. The only reason it took 5 years to take place is because during that time, somebody didn't want it. And every time Terence Crawford made a move to get the fight over the line, all we heard was, oh, he's got to cross the street. He's got to do. Why has he got to cross the street? There are cross-promotional fights in boxing all the time. When a top-ranked guy fights a matchroom guy or a matchroom guy fights a PBC guy, by cross the street, what PBC and Errol Spence meant was Terence Crawford would have to sign a long-term promotional deal with PBC. Why should he have to do that? Why would you make that a barrier for getting the fight done? That means that PBC, at the very least, are not confident in Errol Spence's chances of winning. It's a ridiculous barrier to put in the way if you're really confident. Crawford tried to make the fight last year, and he spoke publicly about agreeing to all their BS. That's how he described it, as BS. And it still didn't happen. Why? Because they wanted the insurance, as in PBC, of having Crawford tied down to a multi-fight deal. That's how dangerous they saw it being for Errol Spence. And if you remember, after the fight fell through last year, they explored every option imaginable for Spence. There was even talk that he was going to step up to 154 and would never fight at 147 again. There was talk about him fighting Keith Thurman and all these different people. And when none of that worked out, they eventually came back to Terence Crawford. Again, took 5 years to get this fight done, just about. You're trying to tell me what? That was Crawford's fault? It wasn't Crawford's fault. It was PBC, Errol Spence, whoever you want to blame. That side, they weren't as confident as Crawford was and Crawford's people. And now we know why, based upon the way the fight turned out. Another comment that some guy left that made me laugh was that Terence Crawford thanked Errol Spence after the fight for doing everything in his power to make the fight. And that therefore proves that Spence was never avoiding the fight in the past. I mean, what a ridiculous conclusion to come to. He was thanking Errol Spence for eventually taking the fight and eventually doing what was necessary to make the fight. He wasn't thanking him for trying to make the fight 2 years ago or 3 years ago, because the fight didn't happen then, because Spence and his people were avoiding it. And to back up what I'm saying, this is a quote from Terence Crawford after the Errol Spence fight. This is what he said: "The win means everything because of who I took the belts from. They tried to blackball me. They kept me out." Who's they? He's talking about PBC. They tried to blackball him and keep him out. They tried to freeze him out of the welterweight title picture. They didn't want to let him anywhere near Errol Spence for years. He's just said it there. In a post-fight interview, they tried to blackball me and keep me out. That's why he said, the win means everything to me because of who I took the belts from. Errol Spence. They, his people, tried to blackball me and keep me out. Keep me well away from their guy. It's not rocket science. I think a lot of these people that are living in denial are PBC cult members because they're not rational at all. I mean, if you ask them, there's no PBC fighter in the history of that company that has ever avoided a fight. You know what I mean? It's like ridiculous. They act as though PBC never protect any of their fighters, that they want all the smoke all the time. I mean, how delusional can you be? All promoters protect fighters. I'm not saying they all protect all of their fighters, but from time to time, they'll protect certain fighters. All promoters do that. PBC have definitely done that. They protected Wilder for years, and they kept Spence away from Terence Crawford for years. That's why it took so long to happen. But at this point of Spence's career, when he's got Jerome Ennis breathing down his neck, it was either take the Ennis fight, which is extremely dangerous, which Errol Spence could easily lose, and he's not going to make a ton of money for that, or fight Terence Crawford in a much bigger fight. At least Terence Crawford's nearly 36. It's a risk either way, but taking on Terence Crawford, the reward is bigger. And if he loses, it doesn't damage his reputation as badly, because at least Terence Crawford is an established elite fighter, you see? And that's why I said pre-fight that the Ennis mandatory probably contributed to getting this fight over the line, on top of Terence Crawford signing the long-term deal with PBC and all that kind of thing. Spence had to make a decision. You know, PBC had to make a decision. You risk an L against Boots or you risk an L against Terence. What are you going to do? You choose the bigger fight. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Are you sick and tired of the mainstream mindset? Does the dogmatic conformity and pathological ignorance have you tearing your hair out in frustration? Then don't be alone. Come and join our brotherhood on Patreon. We stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. You'll gain access to my weekly topical podcast, where we take more deep dives than Jacques Cousteau on an endless variety of subjects. There's also videos, interviews, live Q&As, as well as a vast back catalogue of previous episodes, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen via the Patreon app or download in high-quality MP3. Connect with myself and hundreds of other members in our Element chat group. There's no contract, no commitment, you can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a Mickey D's McMuffin. Just head to my Patreon page via the link below this video and select the tier called the Brotherhood of Reason. I'll see you over there.